What is good, guys? It's Rey-Jay back with another video, and in this one we're going to be talking about the one and only SPY, the Nasdaq, the QQQs, and the indices. Break down what the charts are telling us and what you should be watching for tomorrow, and what I do actually see happening as I answer the question: are we about to see a massive short squeeze? Now, before I break anything down about this, before I get into any more details, I do have to mention a couple of things real quick. Firstly, I'm not a financial planner. Make sure you take none of this as financial advice whatsoever. And also, if you guys can, please smash the like button if you want to see more videos like this. It not only benefits me, it benefits the entire community as a whole. And the last thing is, if you guys can, please check out the Moomoo link down below in its description. If you sign up for Moomoo, the link down below, and deposit $100 into the account, you're guaranteed 7 free stocks, and any could be a free Apple, Tesla, or Neo share. It's a limited time offer. The offer ends in just 2 weeks. Check it out before they run out. With that out of the way, let's get on with the video. So when it comes to SPY, this thing was down 0.63% for the day. In my previous video, I mentioned that the market would most likely get a bit of a pullback and then would get a nice bounce afterwards. And you could see on SPY did actually get a nice pullback. We gapped down pretty hard. We traded sideways. Then we saw the market continue to bleed. But around this 383 level, SPY got a really nice bounce, and that's where the bounce came. And then SPY continued to actually push as the day went on. And at the very end, we got a very, very, very big green candle during the last 5 minutes. This was pretty significant, seeing this thing push over $3 in just 5 minutes. It really pushed up to get a nice close and actually hurt some shorts. Really shows the power of the market makers. Now, the real question is, what's going to happen for tomorrow? Is the market going to just squeeze or crash? Well, we need some context first. The overall options chain, if you look at it, you'll notice that we actually have a relatively low put to call ratio for tomorrow. So the 16th is tomorrow. So I don't expect too much to happen tomorrow. We might just see the market trade a little sideways. We could even see a very flat day, maybe even a somewhat, I don't know, very, very flat day. I don't really know the exact direction of the close, but we do have a tendency of closing very close to max pain. So we might see us close very close to max pain tomorrow, but the bigger day is going to be Friday. On Friday, we have quadruple witching. We have over 3 million puts expiring and over 1.7 million calls expiring. So a ton of options are expiring. We have a 1.92 put to call ratio, and over $399 is what max pain is. All right, so the price is very low compared to where on earth max pain is. And I believe there's a good chance these market makers will want to push the markets up. We might see an end of the week squeeze. It's very likely. Now, here's the problem. I can't promise this because it's also dependent, or at least price action is also dependent on the news. So there is a possibility that the market being very fearful and us continuing to get lots of negative news, that something can also kind of stop the market makers if we get a very bad piece of news affecting the banks. As of right now, it's very possible, but I'm really hoping that doesn't happen, right? And I want everyone to be prepared just in case. We have some very important housing data coming out, also initial jobless claims, and also some important data from the Fed coming out when it comes to prices paid, business conditions, and etc. Nothing too major. I think that one of the biggest things is going to be initial jobless claims. The market will respond to this as it's coming out about an hour before the market opens. Now, as far as the news goes, we were hit with some decent and also some negative news. There was a lot of stress for Credit Suisse today, and now the Swiss National Bank has come out and they said that they're going to provide liquidity for Credit Suisse if it's necessary, basically. And what's very important about this is a lot of banks are going through some very similar issues. They're losing a lot of collateral, a lot of money, and they're going to need a lot of help during a time like this. This is why the market is just thinking about what the Fed is going to do. We're not really too sure about how they're going to respond because inflation is still hot. So the Fed most likely has to continue to tighten, but if they keep doing it, they're going to cause a lot more banks to collapse, at least play a big role in it. Now, Goldman Sachs is cutting their GDP forecast. They're saying that the stress on small banks are key to the US economy, and this is actually very true. What this tells us is what the banks are going through could play a big role in the US entering a recession. It's not everything, of course, but it will play a big role because spending is affected heavily to this, and also contagion is at a higher risk than before. As the banks and the finance sector starts to decline in the markets, there's likely going to be stress in the credit markets and stress in the financial systems. which means the stock market is most likely going to take a big hit, most likely in the future. Do we have to crash this week? It's possible. Excuse me, sorry guys. It's very possible that a crash could happen this week, but I think it's unlikely. I do know it has to depend on the news. I know it's very likely, but I think it's a little less likely because of how the market's performing and also because of the options chain. So as long as we don't get hit with a very bad piece of news affecting the bank, if like five more banks don't collapse, as long as something that major doesn't happen, I think there's a good chance the market's going to hold up, maybe even squeeze by Friday. It's very possible the market makers are going to try to herd shorts. All right. So when will the crash start then? The answer is a little bit later, maybe starting like next week, going into 2, 3, 4 weeks into the future. I think that's when we're going to see a lot more crashing. But for this week, even though it is possible we could see the market just tank, I think it's less likely. And I think we're more likely to see the market hold up because of quadruple witching, because of the option chain, because of max pain, and because of how excessive the shorting was for this specific week. This is the biggest week with the most puts for the next couple of months, actually. We actually have no other week with this many puts as of right now. So this is actually technically, actually, we have it for March 31st. Besides March 31st and also like June 16th, besides those months, this is the biggest options expiration month of the entire year. And this is going to happen for Friday. So this Friday is going to be the biggest day. And that's why I'm starting to think we might see a short squeeze because it does benefit the market makers. They might try to cause it. I know they want to. Will they be able to? It's very possible. So what do I see in the charts? Okay, I'm going to now get on with this part. We failed to fill this gap right here on SPY. There's a little gap. Let me just make this bigger. This gap right here is almost at 390. Around 390, we failed to get to 390. I believe tomorrow, SPY might try to push to fill this gap. It really depends on initial jobless claims and things like that where we open. We did see a decline in the last report, so I'm hoping that trend continues. Maybe SPY is going to fill this gap and then try to go for this 391 area. We might fail here because we now have a major level of resistance off this trend line. This is the previous resistance trend line from before. And I'm actually drawing this out based off where we moved and how this thing was declining over the past couple of weeks. So this is where the trend line is. So what I'm seeing is we might push for like 391. I don't know if we're going to break it. If we do break it, you have to watch this thing level to level. All right, the next major resistance is going to be 393, then 396, then 401. All right, so just remember those levels. But what I'm thinking is, I'm not going to talk about 396. I'm thinking that we might get slowed down somewhere between 391 and 393 tomorrow. And then the market's going to likely get a pullback in the middle of the day. A nice pullback, come all the way back down to the high 380s or so. And I don't know how much lower we're actually going to go, but I do see a pullback in the middle of the day, followed by another potential push to the upside. And we might close very close to where max pain is right here, 391, maybe around 390 or so for a somewhat green day. That's what I'm hoping for. And if this does happen, if the market holds up nicely, there's a good chance the market could squeeze going into like next week. Not next week, I'm sorry, Friday, for Friday. There's a good chance we could see a squeeze if that ends up happening. For NVIDIA, what am I seeing? Well, I told you all that NVIDIA would likely have a pullback and then see a bit of a bounce as well. We didn't really get much of a pullback. The pullback was very small. We actually held very close to 235, which is where the 0.236 retracement is, and it actually pushed up. So what I'm seeing is this thing might try to continue with the push to the upside and retest 244. If that happens, it might just chop back and forth around here until the market just makes a bigger move, and it's likely going to follow it in the meantime. But I do believe this thing is showing some relative strength. Neo is showing some relative weakness. Neo might try to push up to fill this gap, right, just like the market, but now we have this major resistance around the very mid $8, and if it's likely not going to hold this level for too much longer. Neo is already down so much compared to the market over the past like week, and I'm thinking that when the market starts tanking in like by next week, going into 2 weeks, Neo has a lot of downside to come too. It's likely going to break below 8 and start testing the 7.7. 7.2, and then we also have 7 to 6.5. So a lot of downside is still awaiting. For Apple, Apple showed lots of relative strength today. It actually held 150 very nicely, very, very close to the 0.236 retracement line. What I'm seeing for Apple is it might try to push into open after this very bullish close. It might push for this 153.5 zone, so right about here. And then what I'm seeing is it might pull back with the market, trade a little sideways, pull back a little bit, uh, get very close to like the 151 zone, then get another bounce. And I think Apple will slowly, whether it's tomorrow or by Friday, slowly approach 155. I'm seeing it actually continuing to go. And I believe it's very likely it's going to try that. For Tesla, I think there's a gap here. Tesla did not finish filling this gap. There is a chance Tesla could actually come down to fill this gap first and then try to bounce because Tesla is starting to show some signs of weakness. But there's also a gap of here. I think that Tesla's going to try to push up with the market to fill its gap. It might actually reject off this 184 level. It might come very close to filling its gap. I'm not sure if it's going to fill this gap yet. If it breaks 184, there's a good chance it might fill the gap to 187. But I'm guessing that it might come a little short, start to come down, and I don't know if it's going to come all the way down to fill this gap or not. That's a real possibility. But I do think it's going to have an intraday pullback, just like the market, and then try to bounce later on. It might bounce very close to where it bounced today, maybe a little higher, or it could come down to fill the gap down here in the 174 zone. I don't really know which one it's going to be, but somewhere around here, it might pull back a bit and then get a final end of the day push with the market. And Tesla might try to fill this gap today, not today, tomorrow, or it might just come a little short. But I am anticipating that Tesla will close somewhat in the green for a better close than before. JP Morgan is down another 5% almost. Once again, not looking too good. On the hourly time frame, this is continuing to decline. I mean, we had like a gap and drop. It doesn't look too good. There's a big downtrend. It's down big from 144 just a couple of days ago. It's going to likely continue to decline, unfortunately. Google is relatively strong. I'm saying this because of the news that came out involving Warren Buffett. I think that Google needs to break 98, this 98 zone, right? Very high 97s, 98. If you break this on Google, this thing is going to likely fly to 100. That's my target on Google. Looks pretty bullish. And we also have the gap way up here. I'm not going to worry too much about that. For now, let's just talk about 100. I think Google's going to slowly approach 100. Pretty bullish stuff. IWM, this thing actually held 170. This is the very important support line I was talking about. It looks to me like this thing might try to fill this gap tomorrow around 175. Maybe it stops at 176.5, which is the 0.786. It might reject off there, trade a little sideways, but then end up pushing up near the end of the day, close somewhat in the green, a little bit higher than where we are right now. Meta is another strong one. Meta got a nice pump again. In my opinion, let's talk about these levels. I'm going to be watching the 200 flat zone for Meta. Meta was just continuing, just break resistance over and over and over again. It actually broke above it. So the next important level I was watching, once again, 200 flat. I do believe Meta is going to test that. It might reject off 200, then continue to keep going. There is this gap down here. There's so many gaps below. So in the future, obviously Meta does have a lot of potential downside. Just be very careful with it. For the triple Q, nice close. It actually closed in the green. We did break above this resistance line. So now the next major resistance is going to be around 300. Tomorrow we might reject off 300, come a little bit down, retest the trend line around the mid 290s. I'm going to be watching this mid 290 level, which is the next support from previous resistance. And if we break this, then I'm going to be watching this zone. Let me just extend where this zone was. This 299 is about 301-ish level. This is going to be our next supply zone. I do think we're going to retest it very soon. I do think we have a lot of potential. Now, I also want to note that as tech is outperforming the S&P 500, we're likely going to see a bullish continuation for it. So I'm going to be watching if this thing can actually break and hold 300. It's going to be a very important level. I'm predicting it's going to push it up, reject, and maybe try to close very flat, maybe even a little green if the market allows it, as long as there's not any bad news. The dollar pushed up but actually starts to decline a bit. In my opinion, if you look at, let me use a smaller time frame like the hourly, the dollar did slow down as time went on. We're getting very close for an MACD crossover. When this happens, this tells me that the dollar is getting hit with strong resistance. It might start to slow down a bit, maybe retrace to about this 104.2 area. This is the previous resistance, which is now going to become support. If it does get a pullback, this could actually be a little bullish for the market for the short term. The VIX is up over 10%. And when the VIX is up over 10% in a day, that tends to signal that the VIX is a little bit overbought in a way and needs to pull back just a bit. That does have a tendency of happening. We also formed a really nice double top like formation right over here, which tells me that the VIX might end up pulling back a bit, which means the market might rally, which is why for the most part I am seeing green tomorrow. But I'm not sure about how bullish tomorrow is going to be relative to Friday. Friday might be even more bullish thanks to the options chain and the expirations. For Microsoft, this is going to be my last one. I've been going over a lot. Microsoft, in my opinion, we have a gap here. I remember I was looking at this earlier. The 268 gap, I think we're going to go for that gap fill very soon. Fill the gap at 268, get a retracement, retest 266, and we might end up closing kind of green, somewhat green. It could even try to get to the very low 270s. Overall, I am seeing a somewhat green close. Amazon, looking pretty good. It did get a very important rejection earlier, but it got a nice pump afterwards. The next important level, I remember 98 point something, like the 90, very low 98s is going to be important. If we could break that, if we could break above this major resistance, then 100 could come on Amazon. It could retest 100. All right. So, anyways, thank you all for listening. I know this video was a little longer, but I just want the best for everyone. Thank you. The market's to the moon because the long-term future is still incredibly bright. And peace out.